where you say it's just a mailbox. This mailbox is painted with everything you would use for automotive motorcycle paint job, and it's really good practice. This is the shape of a motorcycle gas tank or a fender, anything like that. Gives you a really good idea on how to get it done. A cheap way to practice. You get a mailbox for 25 bucks at Home Depot, and it's pretty well ready to get started on. So check out this video for the whole process. Here's the supplies I use for this project. I just got a cheap Harbor Freight gun. I'm going to spray the sealer out of that, or use that to spray primer. I also use that to spray flake. Has a 1.4 tip, which for small flake, it'd have to be really small for it to come out. So I just take this off right here, buy another gun, take this part, and right here, you can drill this out, get it pretty big where it'll shoot just about any flake. I don't remember the size drill bit, but I have this drilled out to the equivalent of a 2.5, and with it being that big, I can even spray big flake. Something like this comes right out of it. It's a cheap little mod for a cheap flake gun. And then I'm going to use this Astro Europa Pro for the base coat and the clear. So I'm going to do a silver base coat, and then I'm going to use this House of Kolor SG100 intercoat. I'll mix the flake in that, put a few coats over the base coat, put some clear over that, sand it flat, and then start doing the graphics. Just using Airbrush with some, this is pre-mixed black base, thinned a little more than normal. That's good for the patterns with the Airbrush. And then we'll put the Kandy over the patterns, and then put more clear over that. Flake I'm going to use on this one, I'm going to mix it. Since it's a mailbox and it's a small project, this will make it pretty easy. Got this super fine holographic flake here. I'm going to mix that with some House of Kolor silver mini flake. It's a little bit bigger, just to get two sizes in there. And then you're going to need all this tape for your designs. That to back tape the thicker stuff, and then for the really small designs, using this really thin 1/16 inch, some 1/8 inch, a little bit bigger depending on the design. And this should be pretty much all we need for the whole project. Gotta get some cool patterns, find some lace. I just kind of find whatever old stuff from my wife, things like that, and make really cool designs. Little mesh there, some cool patterns in that, some floral stuff. All this works really good.
This is a good low-budget paint booth for small projects. You want to scuff everything up really good with some 600 paper, and then put a sealer down. That way you know you have a good substrate to start with. You just have to let the sealer flash, give it maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then you can put the base coat down. I just put 2 coats of silver base coat here. Works good using the same color base coat as flake, so the flake covers a lot better and easier, and you don't need quite as much. Time to mix some flake and intercoat. If you're doing this for the first time, I feel like it takes a lot more than what you would think. it takes quite a bit of flake to cover good. And the more flake you can get in this inner coat, the less coats it will take to cover. You got to stir it up and look on the stick to kind of give you an idea how much flake you have in the clear. And then what everyone has to do when you get to this step is you have to record stirring it and looking at it on the stick. For some reason, it's just something you have to do, it seems like. Then you have to send this to all of your friends to show them how cool your project is going to turn out. Time to spray the flake. You could do anywhere from probably 1 to 4 coats, depending on how much flake you want. I always do 2 to 3 coats, with the flake mixed pretty good in the inner coat. That gives almost full coverage. Try to get this down nice and even so you have a consistent finish. It's going to have a rough feel and texture to it at this point, but that's okay. We'll get rid of that in the next few steps. Okay, now get 3 coats of clear. It's going to be nice and shiny, but it will still not be completely smooth. We're going to have to sand this down flat. Use some 800 to 1000 grit paper for this. Here's the most tedious part of a project like this. Start laying down tape to get the patterns you want. It's pretty much the sky is the limit with this. You can go from simple to pretty wild. You have to think ahead on which patterns are going to lay on top of others to know which one to take off before the other when you untape. Need to really take your time on this. Put the tape down, press it down good with your thumb to make sure it's attached really good and you don't get any bleed when you spray underneath the tape. Use a razor blade to cut all of your edges and ends where they match up. Just barely score the tape and pull on it and it'll snap right off. You don't want to put any gouges into your clear coat that you had on before. Make sure the surface is super clean for this. I always go over it with wax and grease remover before this step, and I wear gloves to make sure I don't get any oil on it because it's hard to wipe off after you get all the tape on it without lifting the tape or ruining it. Now you want to back tape off anywhere that you don't want to get overspray for the patterns that you're going to be doing. This is my favorite part of a project like this. This is where you can get creative with the laces, designs, things like that. Here I'm using a piece of florally lace, and I'm airbrushing pretty heavy through this one so the pattern is dark because a lot of this I'm going to leave exposed. On the other side, I'm doing a piece of lace that is a little thinner. I'm doing really light because I don't want it to be heavy. I just want it to be the background. You want to try to keep the lace in place where it doesn't move a whole lot. Here I'm just using some stencils, going over the lace that I just did and just kind of touch it up around it with an airbrush, highlighting some areas, shading a little bit. On this project I used some stencils. That makes it pretty easy. Just kind of stick them where you need them and use the airbrush to get them as dark as you need it. After I did the stencils on this, I just did some black shadowing around the outside And then on the edge of all the tape, I had a small pinstripe, so I'm doing that in black. I didn't show the mesh that I used on top, but it was just a really small, fine diamond mesh I laid over the top to get that pattern under these stencils that I'm working on here. This is a pretty easy pattern to create. This is one of my favorite ones. I'm doing a little different variation. It's just fans or sun rays. I'm doing it on one angle and then switching and crossing it, doing it the opposite way. Just gives it a little bit of a 3D effect with a little bit more depth. Just use a piece of cardboard, piece of masking tape, anything like that, and just fade it. This was the last section, so I'm peeling off my last part of the backing tape, and I'm peeling off this small, thin, 16th inch fine line tape that I had around the border of each pattern. I want this small stripe to be the same color as the Kandy, and it gives it a nice hard edge where I did the black. Now it's time to get some color on top of all them patterns. I'm using the airbrush on this just because it's a mailbox and it's pretty small. When I do a motorcycle or anything bigger, like a small jam gun or a mini gun works, or really even a full-size gun, and you can just go over the whole thing. I'm kind of making two different shades of each color doing this. So I'm doing a couple coats on these sections, and then I'll do one coat in the middle just to give it a little bit of a variation. On this I used House of Color organic green, just maybe 25% mixed to the rest Oriental blue. Gives it kind of a blue-green teal color. Now you gotta untape everything that you used for back tape earlier, and then re-back tape again for your next color. I didn't have to tape everything off because with the airbrush you don't get a lot of overspray. If you were using a bigger gun, you would have to tape all that stuff on the top off to make sure you didn't get overspray. Yeah, this is the Oriental blue. Each coat you put on is going to get a little bit darker. So you can just kind of get the color you need by how many coats you put on. And same thing with this section. I'm going to do two different tones of blue. So I'm just going over everything with a couple coats. And then in between these diamond patterns on the one side, I'm going to do an extra coat just to make it a little bit darker, just to give it a little bit more depth. Now all the patterns are done, the Kandy's put down, got it all untaped, going to want to put 3 pretty good coats of clear on, because you need to bury all these tape lines. And you want enough clear that you can sand it flat without cutting into your work that you did before. This is where everything really starts to look good. You put that clear on, all the candy gets depth, the patterns get deep, the flake really starts to shine. Now you want to sand this flat to get rid of the lines and any orange peel you had from the clear that you sprayed. You want to be really careful not to sand through on this step. If you're worried about cutting through, you can do it by hand instead of with any kind of orbital or DA. If you go through all the steps, 1,000 all the way up to 3,000, it needs very little buffing to get it shiny. Time to polish it and really let the shine come out. This is pretty much your finished product here, where all of your hard work pays off and you can see how good everything looks.